Hello and welcome to Weekly Dev Tips. I'm your host, Steve Smith, aka Ardalis. This is episode 27, entitled, How Do You Even Know This Crap? With guest Scott Hanselman. Don't forget, you can follow Weekly Dev Tips on Twitter, as well as in your favorite podcast app. And if you're finding these tips to be helpful, please take a moment to leave a review from wherever you're listening. I read and appreciate every review. This week, we have a special guest offering a dev tip. Please welcome Scott Hanselman, who blogs at Hanselman.com and has a great long-running podcast, Hanselminutes. Scott's going to share with us some tips on how you can leverage your experience to know when a problem you're facing should already have a solution somewhere. Here's more from Scott.
Hey friends, this is Scott Hanselman, and I'm going to share a weekly dev tip for Steve's podcast here. I wrote a blog post recently, and I didn't have a good answer for what to call it, so I ended up calling it, How Do You Even Know This Crap? Basically what happened was I was on a call with a couple of other developers, and we all had various skill levels. Now, I'm not saying that I was the expert or they were the expert and I was a junior, but we each had varied skill levels. We were doing some HTML and some CSS, and I'm not really an expert, but I have a good solid understanding of the fundamentals of those things. And, honestly, since some of our skill levels didn't fall on a single axis, I joked that we'd really need some Dungeons and Dragons cards to express our competencies. Like I might be HTML 8 and CSS 6 and Computer Science Fundamentals 9, or even Obscure Trivia 11, like all of our characteristics. Because I don't think it's fair to say this person's a junior and that person's a senior. But there was an instance in this case where I was older. I had, I would say, the strongest computer science fundamentals. And we were supposed to make a little banner with some text that you would close later, and it was supposed to have some iconography on it that would represent that close button. And one of the engineers suggested, well, we could have some text and then a PNG. And the other one said, well, we could have some text and then an SVG. And those are both fine ideas, although they may or may not have maintenance issues or DPI issues. And I suggested that we use a Unicode glyph. I said, well, maybe there's one that has a square with an X in it or a circle with an X in it. Now, whether or not that's the right answer or not is really up to an expert web designer. But what was interesting about it was one of the engineers said, how do you even know this crap? Because we went through one of the tens of thousands of lists of Unicode glyphs and we saw, oh, there is an X with a square on it. Like, how is that a thing? How would you even know that kind of trivia? And I really thought about it. What is it? Is it a technical gut? Is it my intuition? Is it a sense of smell? How does one pick these things up? And the best I could come up with is that you pick them up by doing via osmosis over time. You just expose yourself to a diverse set of technical problems that all build on that solid base of fundamentals. In this case, while I was not and remain not an expert at HTML and CSS, I think I understand text and ASCII and Unicode and the problems that they solve and the solutions that they represent. So that when I said, there really must be a square with an X in it or a circle with a hyphen. I mean, there's an emoji for poop. Why wouldn't there be one of those things? That I was able to pull that information out of nowhere, out of effectively thin air. So as they say, there's you don't know what you don't know, but you can develop a sense of smell about, someone might have already done this, or there must be a library, or, surely there's a blog post out there that someone has written in the past about this particular topic. So my weekly dev tip for you is expose yourself to as many technical problems as possible, even ones outside your area of expertise or your language of expertise. Try to read about problems that are outside the space that you work in. Remember that reading code makes you as good of a developer or better than actually writing code. So maybe consider reading some source code in your spare time and exploring other people's blogs, particularly ones that show you how they solved the problem and what their thinking was behind it. I hope you found this useful, and if you did, you can check me out at Hanselman.com or at Hanselminutes for some weekly tech chat on my podcast. Thanks, Steve, for this opportunity.
Great tip, Scott. Thanks for coming by and sharing it with Weekly Dev Tips listeners. I think it's a great point that sometimes your collective experience is going to give you instincts that may point to a solution, even if you haven't personally solved the exact problem you're facing before. And one way to accumulate experience faster is by pushing outside your comfort zone. When you've been a developer for many years, you want to have many years of diverse experience to call on, not the same year of experience repeated many times. Thanks again, Scott. That's it for this week. Thank you for subscribing to Weekly Dev Tips, and we'll see you next week with another great developer tip.